Okay, so this question's coming up quite a bit, and I want to make sure that we address it and have a good approach with our clients. So the issue is when someone needs to sell their home, but has to sell before they buy. Okay, so it's not the situation where they can go out and buy that other home and wait, and it doesn't matter necessarily when the home that you are potentially going to list actually sells. So this is going to be the situation where the home that you are going to list needs to sell in order for them to buy. Now, we all know that some sellers get really reluctant to put their home on the market prior to finding that next home. Now, I know for us that seems a little counterintuitive, but to the seller, to the client, they feel like that puts them in this bind, this kind of rushed situation in order to then go out and have to find something quickly. Now, there is some language that we need to put into our contracts as well as onto the MLS, but the language is really important for you to understand so that you can explain it to the client to where it takes that guard down, it takes that reluctance of putting their home on the market out of the equation. Okay, so it's really important that you understand the language that we're using. And then secondarily, I want to give you, it's kind of a one-liner, if you will, that will really help hammer home a situation that they are going to find themselves in by listing and going out and finding the property that they are going to then move into. So the first thing is the language. The language that we need to put into an addendum or even into the listing contract, as well as the MLS, as well as our conversation with the seller, is going to be subject to. Now, this is going to also work in any situation like a short sale or a probate, subject to bank approval, subject to court approval, right? So we use that language as subject to, meaning that this has to happen in order for the ultimate end result to take place, in order for the sale to take place, okay? So subject to seller finding suitable replacement property is going to be the language, the specific language that goes into the contract and into the MLS. And you don't want to assume that an agent that's reading that even understands it. So you want to have your conversations with those potential buyers and buyers agents that come through to let them know this is subject to the seller finding that replacement property. Okay, so when you're speaking with the seller and having this conversation to hammer home how this takes the reluctance, it takes that forced feeling that they have out of the equation, because the subject to language means it has to happen in order for the sale to take place, and everybody would be on board with that. Okay, so understanding the language of subject to is going to be very important for your conversations with the seller. Now, one thing I want you to use in this conversation is this. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, a buyer will always wait for a seller, but a seller will never wait for a buyer. Okay, let me say that again. A buyer will always wait for a seller, but a seller will never wait for a buyer. Okay, and what does that mean? Let's break that down. When a buyer is writing an offer on a home, that is subject to the seller finding that replacement property. A buyer who wants that home so badly, that's the one that they've chosen. This is going to be the best place for us to raise our family. This is going to be the home that's going to put us into that school district that we really wanted. This is going to be our next step retirement home, whatever it is. When a buyer finds that property, they are willing to wait for the seller to find their replacement property, as long as they are knowing that they are going to be the buyer that gets that property. A seller rarely, I shouldn't say never, but a seller will rarely wait for a buyer. And what that means is, if that seller who you are potentially listing their property is becoming a buyer, and they find the replacement property, but yet their home is not on the market yet or doesn't have an offer on it yet, that seller that they're writing an offer to will very rarely, if at all, ever wait for that buyer to put their home on the market or to get an offer for their home, right? So we want to make sure that we get that home on the market, we get them into escrow with a qualified buyer, and then we go out and find them that replacement property, because now they have the power behind them to say, we're ready to move in and buy your home in 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, whatever it is, because our home is on the market, has a qualified buyer offer, and we are in escrow. That is going to get you into the situation that you need to be in with that seller. So this is how to explain it to those sellers who are reluctant to put their home on the market before they find the replacement property. I hope this helps you with those conversations.